Hello, we are going to discuss chapter 4, and it is about forecasting of cash flow. Okay, so what's our TIPOS if it is financial planning? Now, your input here will be your sales forecast. The question will be where will your sales forecast be actually sourced? It is from the marketing, no, marketing department or marketing unit. The process is, of course, financial planning. Okay, your output would be projected or pro forma FS. Okay, and what do you need to store? Of course, you need to store your uh, sales uh, info, your sales data, okay, and make use of your FS as well. What are the tools that you're going to use on a short-term basis? You're going to use your AFN, and you also have your free cash flow. And if it is your long-term concern, then aside from budget and free cash flow, you would look into AFN. Okay, those are your tools. Now let's talk about your budget or um, one of the tool. If we're talking about budget, you have two, long term or short term. If it covers short term, this is your operational budget, and if it is long term, you have your financial budget. Your financial and your operational budget will actually be covering your so-called master budget. Okay, and when you say operational budget, this will be reflected in the income statement, and financial will be reflected in the income statement. If we started with sales forecast, diba, that's your input. So you will start with sales forecast. Ano yung susunod? If you are merchandising, you would merely prepare purchases. Okay? But if you are manufacturing, you have to determine production. Why we start with forecast? Because this would show the demand, and this side would show the supply, the purchases, and your produced. After you do this, what would you think would be the you think of your income statement for you to be able to grasp the sequence. So this would be purchases. Okay. Once you do your sales forecast, this one you would quantity and of course peso. No, purchases would also be quantity and in terms of peso. Produce would of course be, what do you think? Quantity, and the purchase would be peso and quantity. Because, uh, of course, what you would purchase and produce may not necessarily be the same. Then, now after you have your purchases, then you can go to, because you can go to the other part of your income statement because purchases, your produce would definitely be reflected in your cost of sale, 'di ba? Itong inyong item, no? Sa itong sales forecast, under sales yan, net sales. Purchases produced under the cost of sale, okay? Eh, ano na yung nasa baba nun? Eh, hindi ba operating expenses? So, you would uh, look into your operating expenses. Dito naman, dahil, ano yan, syempre, you have to look at your product cost after you're done with the product cost. Kasi, ano ba yung mga product cost nyo? Wala yung isang ano. Ano yung mga product cost nyo? Your product costs are DM, DL, and factory overhead. Diba? Nahuhuli, sinusulat. At lumilipat. Okay. So, after your operating expenses, then you can now look into the preparation of the projected income statement. No, the concern would be how would it affect your item in the balance sheet. Of course, if you have the sales forecast, you would be able to determine how much is cash and how much is credit, and this would affect your AR. Diba? This one, the policy would matter. Likewise with your purchases. Because if it is with your purchases, ganun din, cash and credit. And this would affect your AP. Diba? Yan. Then your, kasi direct materials yung sa purchases, remember. And then you have your direct labor and your factory overhead. This one would look into cash then. Diba? How much are you going to pay in cash? So, with that, we can go now to your additional funds needed, the long term. Because with your budget, you have to remember that with your budget, the main concern would be cash budgeting because we are in finance. Okay? And then later, how are you going to prepare a projected income statement? Okay, let's go now to the next one. Why do we need to determine additional funds needed? Ano ba yung mga ibang terms sa additional funds needed? Pwede rin yan na EFN. EFN. Ano yung EFN? External funds needed. Tapos, ano yung AFN? AFN is additional funds needed. Okay? Ano pa ibang tawag sa kanya? Plug. Okay? Kasi tatandaan nyo, nung mga lower year kayo, meron kayong force balancing na tinatawag. O, dito yun allowed sa topic na to. Kasi your AFN is actually the balancing figure. Okay. So, how would my AFN be affecting my decision? Now, remember that our focus here is the statement of cash flow. And your statement of cash flow, if we are in finance, it's the F word. Diba? We are starting with financing activity, then it's a balance between investing and operating. Remember your operating activities. This would, in terms of supply, in terms of source of fund, it would be internal. Okay? And of course, financing would be external. Of course, investing would be an issue if you have excess fund. Diba? Okay. So, then, how am I going to look into AFN? First, we look into the method in order for you to determine AFN. AFN, you have the financial statement method. Ito yung nagpo-force balance ka. Whatever is the balancing figure, that would be your AFN. And then you have your percent of sales method. Okay? So, yan yung dalawang iti-take up natin. And, but other issue that you have to look into would be, what if my AFN is positive, negative, zero? This I have introduced already before, but most probably you may miss out that because it was discussed in chapter 1. No? But you have to go back to your basic accounting equation. Okay. That is your foundation here, especially in computing for your AFN because you're going to make use of your financial statement. Ano na uli yung asset natin? Demand. Eto. Supply. So, if demand is higher than supply, ibig sabihin asset is higher than your liability and equity, what do you think would happen? Kulang yung meron ka sa sarili mo doon sa pangangailangan mo. O di, ibig sabihin, ano yan? It should be asset less liability less equity. Diba? So, magiging resulta, positive. So, that would be, if it is positive financing activity. Bakit ma'am? Kulang nga kung ano yung meron ka sa pangangailangan mo. Tama? Pag negative, tingnan nyo to. Tingnan nyo tong formula na to. Ibig sabihin, mas marami yung supply, diba? Mas marami yung supply. Pag mas marami yung supply, that is investing. And, pagka zero, ano yun? Ito yung basic model natin, asset. Yung demand equal sa supply. So, ano yan? Sapat lang kung ano ang meron ka. Diba? Zero is operating activity. Okay. So, kung ganun ang kwento ng buhay natin, ang positive ay financing activity. Sabihin dito yung manghihiram ka. At ang negative ay investing activity. Ito yung pwede kang bumili. Kasi, pag financing activity, ano ang keyword? Dito ko na ilalagay at lumiit na ng lumiit. Pag financing activity, the keyword is sell. You're going to sell. Kasi kailangan mong pera. Magsisell, mag-i-issue ng financial asset. You see? Financing activity, you're going to sell, going to issue financial asset. Then, sa investing activity, ano yan? You are going to buy. Why? You have money. You have excess funds. Of course, if it's enough, if it's whatever you have suffices already, yun yung dito sa operating activity, hindi ka na magbabuy or sell. Now, so let's go to how can I compute for AFN? So, unahin natin yung percent of sales method. Okay? So, how do I compute for my AFN? It would be AFN is asset less liability less equity. Okay? That's our formula. If that is the formula and it is percent of sales, anong gagawin ko? How do you compute for the percent? You divide. Diba? So, let's divide. But after that, what do we have to prioritize? Remember, your focus here is what? Sourcing, or the sources, or your supply. And you always start with internal. What do I have? Right? With asset, this would be total demand. Okay? And ganun din naman sa liability. But you start with your internal. What would be the internal source if it is with your liability? It would be your current liability. And your current liability is, di ba yan yung spontaneous source of financing? Ma'am, bakit naging spontaneous source? Kasi nagdi-demand yung current asset mo. Di ba? May pinapautang ka ng mga supplier mo, of which all you need is your credibility. No? And what would be the, dito, balik ako dito, credibility kasi open source, it is unsecured, mostly unsecured, but at the same time, it is inherent with your current asset. Na directly related siya. Cash na yan tangible, na nagbabalance lang yan between uh, marketable security level and cash level. Pag sobra sa minimum cash required, yun, ilalagay mo sa marketable security. Yung receivable, related sa sales. Yung inventory mo, related sa cost of sales, tsaka sa accounts payable. Tapos, yung prepayments mo, yan lang naman, panlima na yan, related sa operating expenses. You see? Kaya talaga siya, inherent doon sa current liability section mo as part of supply. Then, how about with the equity section? Of course, it would be retained earnings. And retained earnings is coming from your sales from operating activities. Okay? If it comes from the operating activities, then ano yung internal source ko dito? It would be profit. Diba? Anuhin na natin. Dito na tayo. Start uli tayo. Asset is equal to liability plus equity and percent of sale. So, demand less your internal source. Okay? So, ayan. Sales. Then, ito na, profit na to. Diba? Plus, ano tong asset divided by sales? Sa ratio. Uy, meron ba yan? Mag-isip kayo, ha? And then, ito meron by liability over sales. Wala naman. Yung profit divided by sales. Meron? Meron. This is your return on sales. This is your profit margin. Okay? Yung asset divided by sales. Meron ba? Okay. So, kung ganon, dahil sabi percent of sales, di na-percent na natin. After that, ano na yung susunod yung magiging concern? Sabi natin, only changes will count. Remember, normally, we are setting key performance indicator. And we normally set our targets because this would set your growth level. If that will set my growth level, di ba kadalasan you starting to, you started with your sales as your setting your KPI, sales performance. And besides, ang input nga natin, sales forecast. Diba? Definitely, you would increase your sales. So, dito, anong gagawin nyo? I-multiply nyo ito sa changes in sales. Okay? I-multiply nyo din. Dali, buburahin ko lang itong isa. Multiply nyo din yung, ayaw naman lumitaw ng eraser. Ayan. Eraser. Multiply nyo din sa changes in sale. Yung inyong, ito to, changes in sales, less. Okay? Pero itong profit margin, hindi na changes in sales. By the way, how do you compute for change in sales? Sales in period 1 less your base or your actual. So itong S1 will actually be your expected sales. Diba? Expected less actual. Or ano pa? Pwede nating gamitin aside from expected. O, edi, ito yung budgeted less your base or actual. Okay. So, yan yung change in sales. So, that's how you get your change in sales. Okay? Or S1 less S times 0. Okay. Now, after determining, na-miss pa pala ako. Ito. Yung profit margin, i-multiply ninyo. Okay, hindi ko makita yung pointer. Kung nasa na yun. I-multiply nyo sa S1. O, yan yung model natin. Pag na-compute nyo na yan, then you would be able to determine your AFN. Okay? Dahil madidetermine na natin kung ilan yung total demand dito sa asset portion, ilan yung internal source. Di ba kasi internal source yung current liability mo. And then dito, internal source din yung galing sa profit mo. Diba? O yun, ito na yung AFN, yung mako-compute mo na pwedeng positive, negative, tsaka 0. Paano pag sa budgeting? Paano yung pag-project ng cash? Di syempre, pag cash, ano lang yan? O, cash na tayo sa cash budget tayo. Siyempre, pag cash budget, in-out lang naman yan. Ang tanong, saan nanggagaling yung aking inflow? Siyempre, yung inflow mo, manggagaling yan sa cash sales. Diba? Dito, ang titingnan mo, ilan yung percent ng sales na cash at ilan yung percent ng collection. Yung policy nila sa collection pagdating sa credit sales. Dito naman sa out, edi syempre, related yan sa cash payment. Sa purchases. Diba? Sa inyong supplier. Ano pa? Yung mga operating expenses mo. Ano yung inyong payment schedule. But before you can do your cash budget, syempre, ang crucial dyan, you know what had happened to the other portion. Ma'am, ano yung other portion na yun? Alam mo yung paano i-forecast yung sales, paano i-forecast yung purchases, paano i-forecast yung production. Ito kasi, hindi natin gagawin dito. Ang gagawin lang natin, itong cash budget. But ang cash budget kasama siya sa financial plan. Okay? At ang cash budget kasama siya sa financial budget. Remember, ang financial budget paggawa ng PS, the balance sheet. Ang operating budget ay paggawa ng income statement. Sa atin, cash is king. So, ang gagawin natin, financial budget. Hindi tayo dito gagawa ng operational plan. Okay? financial budget, aside from your cash, dito class pumapasok yung sa the C word, capital budgeting. Okay? Kasama yan, yung sa financial budget. Kasi ka naman makakagawa nung, di ba, may fixed asset kayo, may equipment kayo, or hindi man equipment, properties that you would like to acquire to support your operation, edi capital budgeting decision yun. O kaya naman, gusto nyo mag-add ng product line, mag-add ng other branches, ayan, capital budgeting decision yon. Okay? So, yan yung isang concern. Paano yung format? Ako lang na ako ng space. Ang format, pag gagawa ng cash budget, dito na tayo. Beginning balance, add, cash inflow, less, cash outflow. That would be your ending balance. But we always start with an end in mind. If we start with an end in mind, this one, with us, we are setting it. Setting at what? Minimum. Ha? Bakit minimum? Hindi ba ang gusto natin maraming pera? Oo naman, masarap pa maraming pera. Pero, cash is the most unproductive asset. Dahil siya yung most unproductive asset, you have to set it at the minimum level kung ano lang yung sapat. And then, you would already invest it to marketable security, to short-term investment. So, if we set our ending balance at the minimum, ano yan, ma'am? Basta ko ano lang gusto namin? No. There's always a model pag nagsiset ng minimum cash balance. But what I can say is, in order for you to set the minimum balance, I think what you are familiar with is yung inventory model na EOQ. Parang ganun tong gagamitin yung model dito. Pero syempre, iba'y tawag, hindi EOQ. Diba? Okay. So, yun yung model na ginagamit to set the minimum level of cash. That you need to know how much is the total demand for cash. Parang total demand for inventory lang yun. And then we need to know the rate of return pagdating sa marketable security. Yun. Ma'am, dito natin kukomputin yun. Sa ano yun? Sa working capital management, kinocompute yun. Yung minimum cash balance. So, lahat talaga related. Okay? So, I repeat, anong concern natin dito? We are concerned with short-term and long-term planning. And if it is short-term plan, you're looking at your operating budgets, looking at sales, purchases, and your production. But what we're going to discuss would be the financial budget, focusing on cash, of which we have to look at cash sales, cash payment, collection, schedule, and payment schedule. Then there is a need for us to compute for the ending balance of cash using the model in working capital management. And for long-term projection of financing needs, it is based on AFN model. Okay, why? Because it would determine the difference between total demand in the form of your asset, which would be increasing depending on the level of sales that you have targeted for you to grow. Okay? Kasi lahat ng items natin dito, the receivable, the inventory, the prepayments level, except for marketable security, because your cash as well will be affected by sales. All increases will be dependent upon the targets that you have actually set. No? So, ano yung mga pag-uusapan natin? We look into how your tax affects cash flow and you are going to look into operating cash flow. Although nung pinag-usapan natin sa chapter 3 na tackle naman ng konti na to. And then your free cash flow. And based on our discussion, your short-term operating plans or financial plans talks about projection of sales and making operating budgets, and your strategic financial plans or long-term will look into your additional funds needed. Your free cash flow is being computed because this would be the basis of actually evaluating a firm which is not listed. Kasi 'di ba listed tsaka unlisted ang mga firms natin. At least pagka listed ka, you can determine the market price per share. That's your indicator. Eh, pagka kasi not listed, free cash flow ang basis, no? Or yung para maalam mo yung NAV, yung net asset value. O yun. So, as I previously discussed, you're going to prepare the cash budget. We're going to evaluate, no? Ayan, ang output natin dito, pro forma income statement, pro forma balance sheet, using percent of sales and financial statement method. Kasi pag nagko-compute ka ng AFN, actually, it's a way for us to be able to project, no? So, let's start with analyzing the firm's cash flow. And paano nga ba na-analyze ang firm's cash flow? You can analyze the firm's cash flow by looking at its item. Mamano yung item? Aba, the operating cash flow, no? Investing activities and your financing activities. So dito, paano nga ba natin kinocompute ang operating cash flow? Paano nga ba natin kinocompute ang free cash flow? And again, kayo normally you more prefer the may problem ng binibigay kaysa yung dinidiscuss. Kaya lang kasi, dearest student, you have to remember na ang crucial pag sa accounting, although this is finance, no? Kaya lang yung mga dinidiscuss naman natin ngayon, kasama naman dito sa board exam, yung paggawa ng cash budget. You have to always know first the why. Kasi the house will be very much dependent on the why. Kaya normally talaga, we have to still focus on discussing the conceptual framework that would support your computation. Although dahil you are not yet very familiar, syempre, mas gusto nyo muna, nakikita nyo yung paano to sinusolve para nabivisualize nyo. No? Okay. So, of course, we're going to do your problem solving. Dito, hindi natin magagamit to yung modified accelerated cost recovery system. Sa Pilipinas naman kasi, 'di ba? Hindi naman ginagamit 'yan. Ang ginagamit sa atin, ano yung mga meron? Straight line. Okay. Ano yung meron? Sa atin, straight line, double declining method, 'di ba? You have the sum of years digit. You have based on production. Okay, so, yun yung mga ginagamit natin. Ito, yung mga problem na binigay dito ay sa sa Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System. I-assume na lang natin yung sa mga problem ang straight line. Okay? Ito na naman makita yung pointer ko. Kalabo na mata ko eh. Ayan. Lalo na pag hindi nakasalamin. Okay, so, straight line ang i-assume natin O, yun. The depreciation. Then dito, we are going to look into the different cash flows in your statement of cash flow, your operating, investing, and financing. 'Di ba? O, review ulit. Review. This is your income statement. Balance sheet, current asset, current liability. long-term liability, tapos long-term asset, and then stockholders' equity. Bilog-bilog. Ano to? Kagaling, nakasagot. Alam ko naman, alam nyo to eh. O, de operating. Tapos, nasa na? Yung investing. Saan? Ay, hindi ko na naman makita eh. Ang investing ay, asan ang investing? Ito ang investing. Ayan. Investing activity. At ito, yung long-term liability. Financing activity. O, di pag natatandaan na natin yan, pwede understandable, makaka-relate na tayo sa operating, ang sa investing. Okay? So, ay ma'am, ba't may ganyan? Kasi, pag sa statement of cash flow, ano ba yung mga method paano siya piniprepare? Pag sa statement of cash flow, okay? Ang statement of cash flow mo, ang ginagamit natin, indirect or direct. Pag indirect, you're starting with net income. Add, deduct, changes in your current asset at current liability. Kaya ito yan. Yung decrease, increase. Hoy ma'am, ba't naging inflow yung decrease? O halimbawa, nabawasan yung AR. Di nagbayad sa'yo. O ito, tumaas yung accounts payable. Ba't naging outflow yan? Pag tumaas yung, asset pala yan. Pambihirang mata ito. Asan na tayo? Increase in asset. Tumaas yung accounts receivable. O ano ibig sabihin pag tumaas yung accounts receivable mo? Siyempre, pag tumaas yung accounts receivable mo, mas marami yung credit sale mo kaysa doon sa cash sale. Okay? Pag naman bumaba yung liability mo, marami kang binayaran. Diba? Siyempre, dividends paid. Paid yan eh. Ito kasi, you're looking at the, effect. O increase in liability, marami kang nautang, di ba sabi nga natin, spontaneous source of financing ang accruals, ang accounts payable. Okay? Siyempre, yung sale of stock tsaka repurchase, pag nag-issue ka, inflow talaga yun. Pag bumili ka, outflow talaga yun. So, ibig sabihin, kapag current asset tsaka current liability section, what you're looking at would be the changes kasi this would be an adjustment to net income. Okay? Plus your mga non-cash charges such as depreciation, amortization. Okay? Direct method ang preference pag nasa finance ka. Anyway, internal naman yung mga nagpe-prepare, mga internal user. They're part of management. So, bakit mas gusto mo ang direct method? Well, it is much better. It is more relevant. Kaya lang pagka-external user ka, you cannot do this because you don't have the ledger. What you can only see, hindi nyo napansin, ang madalas na preparation, tingnan nyo yung FS nyo. Especially doon sa mga goods, ang kanilang klase ng serbisyo. Pagka makikita mo kasi yung sa cost of sales at saka yung sa payable mo, accounts payable. Yung mga changes in receivable, changes in payable as an item that is actually used to adjust your net income. Okay? So, ano na uli? Ang statement of cash flow, dalawang method, indirect, direct, and we start with net income, and that is most often that you can see in the prepared FS that is being audited and issued to the general public. But if it is in finance, it is much better for us to prepare the direct method. Pero dito mga sample pang indirect kasi yung pag-compute mo ng operating cash flow, nag-start ng net income, ina-add back yung depreciation and other non-cash charges. Okay? So before I continue with the other section, let me end at this point, no? Because I know yung mga ibang na i-upload ko sa inyo ay halos isang oras yun. And most preferred shorter version. So let me start at this point. Thank you for listening. We will continue with the discussion with problems for us to be able to relate. Good day.